Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of Sefer Mishlei, the book of Proverbs. We are about to study together chapter 18. Chapter 18 begins with a verse that's somewhat challenging to translate, but let's go for it. L'ta'avo yivakesh nifrod. Literally, that means that he who separates himself is searching for tava, for desire, to pursue his desire. B'chol tushia yiskala. We discussed at length, if you go back to chapter 2, verse 7, we discussed at length what tushia means. But tushia is something, it refers to, I'm going to translate now, sound wisdom or competence, like skill. It could mean skill. So b'chol tushia yiskala, it becomes he is hating, or he is acting against all sound wisdom. The simplest understanding is one which, for some reason, you don't see that much in the standard traditional commentaries. And that is that it's, but I do see it in Reverend Cohen in the Sansino. I've quoted from him a few times, where he says, he just kind of goes for the simple meaning, which I think is really the, it's hard to say the correct meaning, because a proverb by definition can have many meanings, but it seems to me the most straightforward is that it's kind of going back on the famous dictum of the rabbis of Hillel, and recorded in the Mishnah, Al tifrosh minat tzibur, don't separate yourself from the public. So he who separates himself from the public is doing it usually because he is seeking to pursue his desires, and he is going against sound wisdom when he does that. And that's probably the simplest understanding, because it's better to be with the community than to separate yourself from the community. Rashi understands this as nifrad, one who wants to separate himself from God, is searching to fulfill his own tavot, his own desires. And b'chol tushia yiskala, yiskala from the language of ligalot, to reveal, which is meaning so that among those who have sound wisdom, it will be revealed. When he went on his own and tried to study wisdom on his own, he ends up losing, because it becomes obvious that he doesn't know anything. Once he's among those that have tushia, that have sound wisdom. This is, of course, another beautiful understanding of this verse. The word yisgala is spelled, though, with an ayin, which is not the same as ligalot, which would have a hey at the end of the word. Another way to understand this is the Ibn Ezra, who actually looks at this somewhat as a good thing. Someone who nifrad, who separates himself from his usual environment to search for wisdom because he desires wisdom. B'chol tushia yiskala, he will be revealed as someone intelligent in places where there is skill and intelligence and wisdom. So that would be a positive spin on this verse. Anyway, those are some ways of understanding this verse. Verse 2, Lo yachpotz kisil bisfuna. A fool has no interest in really understanding anything. Ki him b'his galos libo. All he wants to do is share his opinions, is share his thoughts. This is something I am sure we are all very familiar with. When you are in a discussion with a fool, all you will get to do is hear whatever he or she has to say. They're not really interested in learning anything about the subject at hand. Verse 3, Bevo rasha ba gambuz. When evil comes, when you also find, where you find evil, you find people shaming other people. Interpersonal strife, as we've seen so many times, is intertwined with and is always present when evil is present. If you want to identify what's evil, look for the person who makes fun of others, looks for the person who puts down others, and in him you will find evil. V'im kolon cherpa, and together with people who are kolon, who are worthy of shame, cherpa, you will find only shame. You will find them only shaming others. Mayim amukim, this is verse 4, Mayim amukim divrei pi'ish. This is a little bit of a challenge here to understand, but let me translate it simply. The words of a mouth are like deep waters. Nachal novea mikor chachma. The foundation, or not the foundation, the source of wisdom is like a pouring river, or like a river that flows and pours forth its wisdom. What does this mean? Mayim amukim divrei pi'ish, that the words of a man are like deep waters. So one way of understanding that is to specify is as a special man. The traditional understand this as ish, as a special person, as a person who is wise. His words are like mayim amukim. They are deep water, they're worthy of probing, worthy of understanding, and they're mysterious and deep. So it's a compliment. Another way of understanding this is the opposite, that when a person speaks, to truly figure out and understand what is really in his heart is just as difficult as figuring out what is at the bottom of the deep sea, the bottom of a deep lake. We don't know. There's no way to know what's all the way down there. I mean, maybe nowadays we can scuba dive, but it's still very, very difficult, almost impossible, if not impossible, to truly plumb the depths. And when a person speaks, any person speaks, to really know what's in his heart is very difficult to understand. But when the fountain of wisdom, when wisdom teaches, it is like a flowing stream one can access. It's not like deep waters that you can't see. One can receive the water from the stream. That would be verse 4. Verse 5, Se'es pnei rasha lo tov. It is, and this kind of goes back to the verse which we just had in chapter 17, verse 26. If you want to look back there, it's a similar idea expressed in different words. But to flatter the face of a rasha, to uplift the person who is evil, to acquit the person who is guilty, lo tov, that is not a good thing. Lahatos tzadik b'mishpat, it is also not good to twist the person who is righteous in judgment. In other words, to twist the judgment away from one who is righteous. One should always, no matter what one's intentions are, it is always crucial and important to do your best to give credit where credit is due, acquit he who deserves acquittal, and to convict he or she who deserves conviction. Verse 6, Sifsei chisil yavo'u variv. Again, an idea that we've had repeatedly over and over again. We had it in chapter 17, if you look back at verse 14 and 19, and many, many other places, but we just studied those together, so I'm quoting those. The words of a fool, Yavo'u b'riv, will always enter into arguments. He's always getting into arguments. He's always fighting with other people. Ufiv limahalumos yikra. And his mouth will, now this is kind of a tough word to translate again, but limahalumos probably refers to fighting, to punching, to blows, to punching and kicking one another. So that is what his mouth, his speech, in other words, whenever he speaks, he's inviting a fight. He's always starting up. It's always going to end. When he talks, you know where this is going. It's going to end up in a physical altercation. Piksil mechita lo. The mouth of a fool is his trap. He builds his own trap. When he opens up his mouth, that is where always the beginning of his downfall. That's what's going to catch him. Usfasav mokesh nafsho. His lips themselves are a snare or a trap for his soul. Divrei nirgon kimislahamim. Now again, this is the same word as we had mahalumos. So mislahamim means blows or punches or kicks for one person against another. The words of a nirgon, a person who whispers, who's whispering rumors, whispers and says, you know what I heard about so-and-so. That person, those words are like blows. Vehim yardu chadrei vaten. and they go down into the deepest depths of a person's belly. In other words, once you hear them, they're inside you can't forget them, and they end up causing strife, they end up causing arguments. Verse 9, Gam misrapev imlachto, he who is lazy in his work, he who does not work hard and does not put the effort in necessary, achulu bal mashkes, he is a brother to the one who actively destroys. The lesson here being that laziness, even though one might think, well, at least you're not actively destroying anything, well, you're kind of the brother to the one who actively destroys, because ultimately laziness, you overlook things and destruction results from that. Migdal Oz Shem Adonai Bo Yorutz Tzadik V'Niskav. This is verse 10. The name of God is a tower of strength. And it's interesting how this comes after verse 9, right? It's like saying that how does one overcome the laziness? How does one overcome the people who whisper, who cause strife, who cause fights? That is in the name of God, Migdal Oz, one who has trust in the name of God, one who follows the laws, the rules, the teachings that God teaches us. Bo yaritz tzaddik v'niskav. One who is truly a tzaddik will run in that direction in order to get away from the blows that are being caused and the fights being caused by people. He will run to the name of God, v'niskav, and he will be uplifted above them. He won't be dragged down into the pits of the people punching each other. Rather, he is going to be above them, and he's going to be protected from them by the tower of strength, which he seeks and he finds when he seeks God. Hon ashir kiryat uzo, the wealth of a wealthy man, that is the kiryat, that is the fortress of uzo, of his strength. And this is can be understood in many ways, but the simple way of understanding this is as a counterweight to verse 10. The tzaddik, the wise person, runs to God for strength, and for him it's a migdal oz, right? But the hon ashir, however, a wealthy man, he tries to get away from those blows, from those fights. He runs into his wealth. He thinks his wealth is going to protect him. Ukichoma niskava b'maskiso, and in his foolishness, right? In his own mind, right? And if you look at the Ralbag, there's different. A lot of the classic commentators understand this a little bit differently, but I'm going with the way the Ralbag seems to understand this, and other more modern commentaries also understand it this way. In his foolishness, he looks at his wealth as if it is a high wall, but it's not, because as we see in verse 12, "Lifnei shever yigbal lev ish." Because once a person is proud, pride always precedes a crash. Pride always precedes ruin. Lifnei shever, before someone gets ruined, how does that come about? That comes about when a person's heart becomes prideful and arrogant. V'lifnei chavod anava. But for someone who truly achieves honor, that is always preceded by humility. So it's a hint to what was meant in verse 10. The person who seeks God seeks by definition humility. Not seeks humility so much as has humility. He uses humility. That's how one gets into the true tower of strength. But one who relies on his wealth and his foolishness, he thinks that that's what's going to save him. That's yigbal lev ish. That's the person who is prideful and arrogant, and that's going to be the beginning of his downfall and his ruin. Verse 13, Meishiv davar b'terem yishma. A person who answers a question before even listening carefully to what the question is, iveles ilo. This is foolish for him, uchlima, and it is a disgrace to him, because he's not going to properly answer the question if he doesn't hear the question. You have to listen carefully first before you render an opinion. If you're the kind of person who answers before he hears the question, is a person who's going to disgrace himself. Ruach ish, this is verse 14. Ruach ish yichakel machalehu. The spirit of a person, right, is will help him in his illness, right? So in other words, and this is similar to what we had before in chapter 17. The verses taught us about how a person's state of mind is important for his physical health. If a person is strong in spirit, it will help him get through his illness. V'ruach necheah, but a broken spirit, mi yisa'ena, who can carry it? In other words, if a person is broken in spirit and has no fight left in him or her, right, then he will not be able to get through the illness. He will not be able to get through his troubles. So concludes verse 14. I'm going to stop this chapter here. This is about halfway through. And we will continue the rest of chapter 18 in the next podcast. Thank you so much for studying the first half of chapter 18 together. Looking forward to studying the second half of chapter 18 and, of course, the rest of this incredibly beautiful book of Proverbs together. Before I sign out, I want to welcome any comments. You can always email me directly at weinrebsaul, that is WEINREBSAUL @gmail.com. I will do my best to answer any questions, comments, suggestions, etc. And I wish all of you a wonderful, wonderful day. And again, thank you for participating.